Intervals. Intervals are the distance between two musical notes. They are what give melodies and harmonies their unique sound and characteristics. Intervals usually fall into two categories: diatonic and non-diatonic. Diatonic intervals are those that naturally occur within the major scale. This includes the distance between one note and any other note. Non-diatonic intervals are those that do not naturally occur within the major scale. Let's first take a look at the diatonic intervals within one octave. All intervals are made up of two things: a number and a quality. Within one octave, the numbers will range from 1 to 8, and their qualities can be perfect, major, minor, and augmented. Diminished intervals do not exist within the diatonic interval set, but we'll get to that later. Intervals can be measured in two ways: the number of half steps between the two pitches, and the relationship between the frequency of the two pitches. Let's start with perfect intervals. What makes them perfect? Perfect intervals are called that because of their simple pitch relationships and their high degree of consonance. The perfect first, or the unison, is the most consonant of all intervals. It is just the same note played again, one after another. The perfect eighth, or the octave, is the next most consonant interval. This is the distance of 12 half steps and is just the same note played twice, but the frequency is doubled. A great song to remember the sound of the octave is "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." The perfect fifth is the next most consonant interval. The perfect fifth has a distance of 7 half steps between the two notes, and the frequency of the top note is the bottom multiplied by 3/2. A way to remember the sound of this is the first note change in "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." Just as a note about frequency ratios, the ones that I'm using here are the just intonation frequencies. In our current tuning system, we use 12-tone equal temperament, which means that these ratios are close, but not exactly what you would hear on the piano. For more info on that, look up 12-tone equal temperament versus just intonation. The perfect fourth is a somewhat controversial interval on whether or not it is consonant or dissonant. It is found by multiplying the ratio of their lower note by 4/3, and the distance between the two notes is 5 half steps. In certain instances, it can be consonant, such as in inversions, but in others it can be dissonant, such as when it's used with a sus4 chord. A great way to remember the sound of this one is "Here Comes the Bride." Now let's look at the major and minor diatonic intervals. The second, third, sixth, and seventh can be major or minor. Whether an interval is major or minor is determined by the number of half steps it is above from the lower note. In general, the major intervals are 1 half step larger than the minor intervals. The minor second. The minor second is the smallest distance between two notes that we have in the Western music system. Some other cultures use what is called microtonality, which makes the half step even smaller. But for Western music, this is generally the smallest distance. The distance is 1 half step, and the ratio between the frequencies is 15 to 16. The half step is described as a harsh dissonance, with a significant amount of rub between the two notes. An easy way to remember the sound of this interval is Jaws. The major second. The major second is made up of 2 half steps between the notes, or a ratio of 8 to 9. The major second is described as a soft dissonance. The rub is still there, but it is less than that of the minor second, but it does not feel at rest. A good way to remember this sound is the first 2 notes of "Happy Birthday." The minor third. The minor third is made up of 3 half steps, or a ratio of 5 to 6. The minor third is a consonant interval, though it is considered by some to be less stable than that of the major third. This interval is always present in minor chords and is what gives it its somber sound. A good way to remember this interval is the first 2 notes in the song "Green Sleeves." The major third. The major third is made up of 4 half steps, or a ratio of 4 to 5. This is also a consonant interval. This interval is always present in major chords. A good way to remember this interval is the song When the Saints Go Marching In. The minor sixth. The minor sixth is made up of 8 half steps, or a ratio of 5 to 8. A good way to remember this interval is the entertainer. The major sixth. This is made up of 9 half steps, or a ratio of 3 to 5. An easy way to remember this one is the NBC jingle. The minor seventh. The minor seventh is the distance of 10 half steps and is described as a soft dissonance, just like the major second. The ratio is 5 to 9. A good way to remember this is the song Somewhere from West Side Story. The major seventh. The major seventh has a distance of 11 half steps and is described as a harsh dissonance, just like the minor second. The ratio is 8 to 15. A good way to remember this one is the song Take On Me. The tritone. The last diatonic interval we have is the tritone. This is also commonly known as the devil's interval. The distance between the two notes is 6 half steps, which splits the octave in half, and is described as the most dissonant of all intervals. The ratio between the two notes are 32 to 45. A good way to remember the sound of this interval is the first 2 notes of the song Maria from West Side Story. This is also where the augmented interval comes into the diatonic intervals. Technically, the diatonic tritone is an augmented fourth. More on augmented intervals coming up. Non-diatonic intervals. Non-diatonic intervals are those that do not regularly appear within the major scale. All of these intervals are either diminished or augmented. In the context of intervals, diminished simply means lower by a half step, and augmented means raise by a half step. But to fully understand these intervals, we have to first understand what is called enharmonicism. That is a complicated word for a pretty simple concept. Enharmonic intervals are intervals that look different on the page but sound the same. For example, the distance between C and F sharp is 6 half steps, but the distance between C and G flat is also 6 half steps. This results in the sound of a tritone either way, even though it's written 2 different ways on the page. So now that we understand enharmonic intervals, let's discuss some of the non-diatonic intervals. One of the most common you will see is the augmented second. Augmented second means take a major second and add a half step. So this results in the distance of 3 half steps, which sounds exactly the same as the minor third, but is written down as a second, such as C to D sharp. This is extremely common in the harmonic minor scale. The distance between the 6th and 7th degrees in harmonic minor is 3 half steps. But this begs the question, why not just write it out as a true minor third if it sounds that way? The answer is mostly convenience of organization and ease of the musicians reading the music. Let's take that harmonic minor example again, C to D sharp. That interval occurs within the E harmonic minor scale. Normally when a musician sees the scale, they want to see each note represented at least once. So we want to see E up to the next E represented in some way. This is both for the ease of reading and for muscle memory. This and this are the same, but this one is easier to read and less confusing to play. This is also true for composers and conductors when organizing the score and keys. It is a convention to write out the scales this way, so introducing accidentals outside of the standard suggests a change in key or something else going on. At the end of the day, either one works, they sound the same, but one is easier to understand, so we go with that one. Another common occurrence is the augmented sixth. The augmented sixth appears in all augmented sixth chords, the French, the German, and the Italian. The augmented sixth is equivalent to a minor seventh. It is done this way again for the ease of recognition in the score and for the players. Technically, you can pretty much make any interval non-diatonic. The augmented unison, which is pretty useless, C to C sharp, It's written as a unison because both notes are C. This one tends to be redundant though. It's easier to just say half step. Or the diminished sixth. Take a minor sixth and lower it by a half step, and this will give you the same sound as a perfect fifth. When stuff like this happens within a score, it is done for a very specific reason, and usually that reason has something to do with the ease of reading for musicians, conductors, or composers. Very rarely are augmented or diminished intervals just used for the gimmick of it. The last kind of intervals that I would like to cover are intervals that span more than one octave. So far we have discussed only intervals that stay within the octave, but obviously they can go beyond that point. After the eighth, or the octave, the numbers just keep going up. For example, the distance of one octave plus a whole step would be a major ninth. The distance of one octave plus a major third would be a major tenth. However, for sake of convenience, when the intervals start getting really big, they are normally just referred to as their one octave equivalent. For example, if we had a double bass playing their open E string with a violinist playing their G on their E string, that would technically be a minor 34th. I hope I counted that right. But in a rehearsal or other musical settings, it would be way more convenient just to call that a minor third plus or minus a few octaves. Nobody wants to sit there and count that interval in rehearsal or while doing their music theory homework. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, please consider leaving a like and subscribe.